Awesome. I've got you too. All right.
Great. I can actually see your backdrop is the top of it from
this one here.
Yeah.
Thanks, man. I've been I use my webcam stand like whenever I speak and stuff like that. So when I So man, the reason that I wanted to talk to you today, I know that through messaging and stuff, it probably wasn't clear, but I wanted to make sure that I reiterated that I really like what you do, as far as the YouTube content, the free stuff that you do. I feel like that you communicate the message of what neuro-linguistic programming is very well. But I'm wondering if you have had a lot of trouble over the years honing that in and being able to come up with creative new ways to update that information and things like that. I'm just interested in your journey, kind of.
Well, I tell a story, and I've told it a few times, especially when I was selling Transforming Yourself, the online training, which is basically hitting a plateau in NLP and my NLP understanding. I had what you would think was all the right teachers. I live in Santa Cruz, so I have access to some of the people who were there from the beginning.
Right.
I don't have access to John Grinder, but I've bumped into him a few times at grocery stores around here.
So, oh, wow, that's awesome.
It's been kind of interesting because we haven't always had the best. I've had some email exchanges with him, but it hasn't gone very well. And I bumped into him at the grocery store one time, and so I introduced myself, and I said, we exchanged some emails, and he goes, oh, really? I said, yeah, it didn't go well. But he was more receptive the second time around. He's actually a nice guy to meet in person, not necessarily the nicest guy on email, but
yeah, you know, it's interesting. Communicating via text and writing it's a unique animal. I have found that it's oftentimes you think you're communicating really well, and it can just fall apart really quickly, depending upon the person's skill at comprehensive level and their ability to read. And also, you know, you don't know how well you're communicating via their linguistic frames of reference, you know, things that they like to communicate. So,
well, you also can't see, like, you can read something and you don't know exactly how they're meaning it, so you're left to interpret it, because there's personality. You can say things in different ways that sound like a question or a statement or a demand, and then facial expressions. You know, there's so many things that we rely on in communication.
Right.
The words are usually very minor compared to everything else. So
yeah, so that's an interesting segue. If you don't mind talking kind of about that, like you said, reading people. I believe that your free sensory acuity course was kind of my introduction to NLP GYM, which is NLP GYM is your baby, right? That's your creation. That sensory acuity course, I think that sensory acuity is such an NLP word. It really, what you just said about the ability to read people, I think that's really a pretty good overall umbrella for what sensory acuity is. But you have a unique ability to do that instinctively. Do you feel like that you always had that, or was that something that
no, definitely. Yeah, it was NLP that really helped me with that. In fact, yeah, I was not good at reading situations and reading people, and I think NLP was huge in helping me do that. Like, I would come out. I was in sales before I got into NLP, and one of the reasons I got into NLP was to help fix my business, there was a lot of other reasons why my business was broke that I didn't understand, but NLP actually had helped me with that. But I would come out of sales conversations where I was just like clueless about what had happened. You know, the person was either upset with me, or they didn't buy, or there were so many factors. And when I started doing NLP and I really started training in the sensory acuity, which was one of the reasons why I got into NLP, I used to love to watch Sherlock Holmes type movies, or where Sherlock Holmes looks at a person and can tell them where they're from, and, you know, deduce all these things about them. I used to think that was the most amazing thing. So when I came across NLP and they were doing something similar, that was a huge draw for me. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to get into it. So when I got into it, I really started to focus on that. And usually with sensory acuity, they only give you a day or two in an NLP training to go through that.
Right.
which is really unfortunate because it is actually, I mean, it is the container in which it makes everything else in NLP possible. And I recognized that right away. So I started practicing it a lot. And I was noticing also that a lot of other NLP students were not practicing it. They would go from one training to the next, and they would get into these really advanced trainings. And they were wondering why they couldn't make some of these advanced processes work. And they would come to me and say, how are you making this work? And then I would ask them, I'd say, well, didn't you notice when the tonality shifted, or their eyes moved, or their skin tone changed? And they were like, no, I didn't notice that. And I said, well, you need to go back to the basics and start practicing that stuff.
Yeah.
So originally when I started NLP GYM, I started with my practice partner, Logan Christopher, who has since moved on to doing other things. He left NLP GYM, but we're on good terms. And we would practice sensory acuity like over and over and over. And I had a practice group too. And we always started every practice with sensory acuity drills.
Yeah.
And then I would get through my daily life focusing on one thing every day, just like in the training, the free sensory acuity. And that will open your world up. You will notice things you have not seen before and have not heard or felt when you start practicing like that.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you've continued to use the word sensory acuity, because I really encourage anyone that watches this interview to go and download that. I thought that guide was really great. I do like also reiterating that as an overall umbrella, this is to help you read situations, read people, what they're thinking, how they're formulating beliefs and ideas, how they're representing the world to themselves. And this is really the fastest and, in my opinion, the most effective way to teach human beings how another human being is formulating their idea of their reality. And is that a pretty accurate way of putting it?
Absolutely. And even if, so for sales, it's amazing, like, because you can see somebody formulate an objection unconsciously before it becomes conscious. And if you can do that, then you can head off the objection, and just if you see like even a sudden shift in eye movement, or they look away or something like that, and you can just stop your conversation and say, I felt like I lost you for a second there. What was it that thought that you just had, or something like that? Very gently asking for it. If you can get to the objection before the person actually articulates it and makes it conscious, you're way more likely to be able to overcome that objection. So in sales, it's wonderful. In relationships, it's wonderful too, because you can tell when your partner is, something's shifting, the state is shifting, their opinion about something or their feeling about something is shifting. You can recognize this. And so a more chunked down word for sensory acuity would be calibration. So you calibrate by understanding, okay, what state are they in? And you start to recognize when a person is in a particular state. If you keep watching, you can see the cues that let you know if they're in a good state or a negative state. And because everybody's going to do it a different way, you can't necessarily look at all people and say, if they do this, this means they're in an angry state, or it doesn't always work that way. So you have to find calibration is about finding that person's particular states and their state shifts. And then it gets to the point where, and this was very helpful, has been very helpful for me when I'm interviewing people for jobs, because I have businesses where I employ people, is catching people when they're being deceptive. Now, people can be deceptive and not really realize they're being deceptive. It's the person who has gained a bunch of weight, and when they go to the clothing store and they say, what size are you? And you tell them the old size rather than the new size. Consciously, you may be thinking that's what I want it to be, so I'm going to say what I want, but unconsciously, that the truth is you're not the same size. You see stuff like that.
Right.
In job interviews, I would have people who were being deceptive, and I don't know if they were doing it consciously or not, but I could tell. And when you're deceptive, your unconscious has to reconcile that. And so you will see their bodies go asymmetrical, or you will see them blink strangely, or they'll say words that don't seem to fit the situation. And that's the unconscious trying to reconcile it. So a lot of times people say, well, can you tell if somebody's lying? And it's not so much that I can tell if they're consciously lying, but I can usually tell when somebody's being deceptive. And sometimes I still get fooled. So I'm not a complete expert or a master at this. But when you just start watching for these things, it starts to become obvious.
Yeah, and I really feel like I feel like that you probably are an expert, and I feel like that even at expert levels, we can still be wrong from time to time. or we can be correct about the deception, but not necessarily correct about the motivation.
Exactly. Because people will be deceptive, but in a sense of deceiving, trying to deceive themselves as well. So I try not to judge too much of whether a person's like trying to screw me.
Yeah.
That they're deceiving themselves, or they want something to be a certain way so badly that they have overridden the truth with their conscious mind.
Right. Yeah. And it is very valuable because I think a lot of times people sometimes are deceiving themselves, and I believe that a lot of our therapeutic work comes in that area of helping reveal to people the barriers that they've set up and sabotage themselves from a successful model, and they don't even realize it, you know?
Well, when you do that, it creates a shadow, and how dark that shadow gets depends on how much you keep deceiving yourself and lying to yourself, and that just does not lead to anything good. I've been in that darkness myself. I've had to pull myself out a few times.
Right.
So that's one of the reasons why I got into NLP. I had fallen into depression twice, and I got the second time. I was like, there isn't going to be a third time because I'm going to do something about this.
Right.
And I started my NLP training.
Now, I have found that many practitioners that I've gotten close to are they dabble a bit in philosophy. Do you consider yourself someone who dabbles in philosophy?
Yeah, I was a little bit obsessive about it before I got into NLP. And
Okay.
And that was another reason why I got into NLP, is because I got to a point with philosophy that I was like, okay, it's great to kind of stay in this sort of meta state of, trying to sort it all out from a distance. But if you're not in the trenches, getting your hands dirty with techniques, processes, and things that you can really apply, it's like, I don't know, Gary V. Vaynerchuk, he's an interesting guy. And he says, I don't give an F about your ideas. If you're not doing something, you're not taking action on your ideas, they're meaningless to me, he'll say. And I think that's a little harsh, because I do like ideas. I like to brainstorm and, philosophize and everything. But there's a lot of truth to that, because, there's a lot of people with great ideas, but they're not taking action on them. And one of the reasons why they don't is because they're afraid if they do, they'll find out that great idea wasn't so great after all. It didn't hold up to the standard or the test, which is reality.
That's the fear, right? It's the thing that holds people back from ever trying to succeed, is the fear of the failure.
Right. But you got to get out there, and you got to just destroy your ideas. That's not the point. The point is not to destroy them, but the point is to put them to the test.
Sure.
To see what happens. And then they're going to be destroyed, because they're never as beautiful in reality as they are in your mind.
Or as awful.
Or as awful. Yeah, that's true too. Failure is never as awful in reality as it is in your mind.
Right.
I've failed many times, and the relief is often when you fail and you go, oh, okay, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's not that bad. Speaking of philosophy, what school of thought, or do you have any philosophers that you still kind of is your bread and butter?
I don't read too much philosophy anymore. What's interesting is I was really into Friedrich Nietzsche when I was in high school. And it's funny to see the path that I've taken, which I thought was like very disjointed, but not nearly as disjointed as I thought it was, to coming to NLP. Friedrich Nietzsche was actually, there's a lot of people given the term father of, human potential, or all these names about what it is come to be that the field of personal development. And actually, I think it really goes back to Nietzsche. I mean, Nietzsche was talking about values. He was talking about dropping tradition and dropping a lot of these things that we were just carrying along that weren't really helping us.
Yeah, a lot of people thought of him as nihilistic, but it seemed like the only thing he wanted to destroy was the unnecessary parts of humanity that kept getting perpetuated.
Right. And a lot of people say that he was trying to destroy God and Christianity. Not necessarily. What he was just basically saying was that we had entered a modern era of science where he was making a call right there that the religion was over. And now we were entering the world of science. And there's a lot of truth to that, but not entirely. He couldn't have completely predicted the future, and we still have religions around. But his whole thing was to draw from your humanity, and that we had so many wonderful qualities that we weren't developing, and for the sake of handing it over to like a higher power or something that's ethereal, or believing in superstition. And he said, well, no, we've got all this stuff right here.
Yeah.
So that was very empowering for me when I was in high school, and especially I was brought up in a very strict Catholic family.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, it was not serving me at all.
Pentecostal.
Pentecostal. That's pretty strict.
Yeah.
So, it was not. I mean, it was, and not only was it not serving me, but it was a source of a lot of pain. And I was brought up in the South. I'm from South Louisiana, so it was a lot of fire and brimstone, a lot of fear-based teaching and the way they were going about it. Now I know that, you know, when I grew up, I met other Catholics from other parts of the country and everything, and they had a very different experience.
Right. Yeah. Some of it's very pleasant and friendly and furry, and some of it is very dark and morbid.
And my exposure to it was very dark. So Nietzsche was kind of a break from that, and it was very empowering to me. So I took some philosophy classes in college, and one of them was the philosophy of psychology, and that's where I was introduced to NLP in a more formal way. And my professor at the time, he knew many different modalities, many different forms.
Oh, wow.
His favorite was NLP. And he would ask for volunteers because he would do Gestalt therapy. He would hypnotize us. He taught us how to hypnotize each other. And every time he asked for a demonstration subject, I was like, I'll do it, because it was just fun. But he also philosophized about it. He gave you the philosophy behind all these therapies. And I was fascinated with NLP from that point on. There was nobody really in New Orleans at the time who was teaching, and I was a broke college student anyway, so it's not like I could have afforded it. But and it was right after college where I had fallen into a depression, and I didn't have health insurance at the time, so I called him up and I said, I need help. I'm in a bad situation. Would you help me out? And he said, yeah, come to my office. And he said, I don't need your money. I don't believe in a free service though, so you need to give money to charity, or you need to volunteer for community service. I was like, wow, okay, sure. He said, come back next week and we'll start sorting this out. I came back next week, and one session, I was fine. I walked out of there, depression was gone.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. I mean, I actually I walked out of his office and I had to sit down on a bench and say, did that just really happen? Yeah, it was really, it left a lasting impression. So, you jump forward about a decade, and I'm living in Santa Cruz, California, and I fall into depression again. I go to a traditional psychologist, and it takes them a year to help me come out of that, instead of one day with my professor who used NLP.
Yeah.
And I also realized that he focused more on problems. Like, he could get you out of the hole. So I came to him, I was down here, and here's like ground level. So he would get me to here.
Right.
And then I started getting better. So when I go to see him, I was up here, and then he would actually bring me here.
Because he would reintroduce you back to the problems you talked about last time.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's when I knew I needed to move on, and that's when I knew that I needed to find, just like working out, like, with your muscles and your endurance, you don't just go and do that one time. You don't go do a 1 week boot camp and now you're healthy and you never have to do it again.